So welcome to tonight, the latest edition of our exploration of native plants in the Piedmont series, with a focus tonight on the very seasonal topic of fireflies. So my name is Michael Cowan. I'm a member of the GMPS State Board and also the North Metro Chapter's Education Committee, and that is who is bringing you this webinar tonight. So since fireflies live and are loved all over the state, not just the Piedmont, we invited members from all chapters and even those not members to join as well. Of course, if you're not a member or you have or one that hasn't renewed your membership lately, that is very easy to rectify by going to gnps.org. You can also sign up for our emails and check the calendar for other upcoming events like our monthly native plant rambles, plant rescues, and other webinars and meetings. Please also follow GNPS and your local chapter on social media for updates. So the program tonight is being presented by Anna Yellin and Ahmad Blades. They are both scientists in the Wildlife Conservation Department of Georgia's Department of Natural Resources. Anna is originally from the DC area and has been at the DNR for 17 years. Ahmad is originally from New York City, but grew up in McDonough and has been at the DNR for 4 years. So I thought fireflies would be an interesting topic and certainly seasonal in the summer, because I grew up in the country with a firefly show every night, even though that was many years ago. But it's now very rare to see them in huge numbers, especially in our urban environments and where I live in Dunwoody. Anna and Ahmad are going to teach you all about them, why we don't see them as much now, and what we can do to change that. And while they are not dependent on a host native plant, like most butterflies of moss that you're used to hearing about, they are certainly dependent on the habitats that are best created by all the native plants that we so much love.
Thanks, Michael. I'm excited to be able to talk to you all tonight and with Ahmad. I'd like to start off, just do a little bit of experiment and ask you all if you could close your eyes for a second. I'm not going to shift the slide yet, but do you remember when you saw your first fireflies? They're the signs of spring and magic. For many of us, it might be a very early memory. And for those who might have lived in the city and were older when they saw their first fireflies, you might have suddenly felt again like you were 7 years old. How many times will you be able to sit in a webinar with a group of people and be able to share a memory in some way? And that's one of the reasons I think that fireflies are magic. And I really hope that we can all work together to conserve them. And yeah, open your eyes again and let's go into it. So first, I wanted to give you a little bit of the housekeeping from our side and give you a little bit of an outline of what we're going to be speaking about. First, fireflies are not the only luminescent insects that we have in Georgia. So I want to show you a few others. And then we're going to talk specifically about those that you see at night. We're going to move on to those that are in Georgia, a little bit about their flashing, some species accounts, and then there's a lot of things that you all can do to participate and help fireflies. So I want to introduce to some of you and to let more of you know about the Firefly Atlas, why it's important, some of the tools and methods that you'd use, some of the focal species that we're responsible for looking for in Georgia, and also talk about what DNR is doing to try to help conservation. And then we're going to talk a little bit about our fireflies in decline, like so many of our newspapers are showing. Next slide, please. Okay, so Georgia has quite a lot of different luminescent insects. Of course, we have those that are in the family of the firefly. We also have some that are the railroad worms that you may have or may not have seen. They're more in the soil. We also have click beetles, of course, and some of you might see those in the forest, and rarely do people really see that some of them have these little headlights on them. And there's always been a mystery in Northwest Georgia. What is that foxfire glow? And what it actually is their fungus. They're actually from the family of flies, Dipteridae, and they're fungus gnats. Next slide, please. So what causes fireflies to do their glow? Well, luciferin is a pigment. And then there's an enzyme catalyst. It's not talking about science, it's just basic. An enzyme catalyst, and then energy in the cells, ATP, they're all kind of put in and moved around together. And then as the firefly breathes in oxygen, actually like we would, there's a reaction that goes off. And the amount of oxygen that they pull in helps regulate the flash. Next slide, please. There's different stages. And so that's going on in the adults, but it's also actually this enzyme, catalyst, and oxygen is all working together to make some of these species glow. And I'm just going to focus now on the glowworms and the fireflies. And there's two different kinds of fireflies that I'm going to mention. So they all start off the same way. They start off as eggs and they're glowing, and then they move around and they're all insects that metamorphosize. So they're going to go into a larval form, and that also glows with all three different types of insect families we're talking about. And then as they get bigger, they'll transform again. And in the glowworms, the females will continue to glow and they're going to resemble larvae. The males won't glow anymore. And then you have your flashing fireflies, which that's what most people think about when they think about fireflies. And the glowworms are just kind of like, they're off to the side. They're actually not fireflies. But in terms of the flashing fireflies, as they become adults, most of the males will glow and the females as well. Or I should say all the males, because it's the flashing fireflies. Then we go and we have our dark fireflies, and those are not ones that as adults will flash or glow. Next slide, please. Okay, just a little spacer. Let's go into the next slide, the glowworms. So the females, as you see, those are on the left, and they're going to retain that larval form. And not many people actually see them in the woods because they're buried in there. They're out there in the dark. They're not very obvious, and they're very seasonal. There is a little graph on the side there that shows a little bit of how there is a broad season, but they're hard to find. I was really happy that I was able to find one a couple of years ago, though, and just look how tiny they are. That is a little vial that's about this big. And that little guy at the end, that is a female glowworm. And the male on the right is what they look like, the adult males, and they're not going to have any light coming from them. Next slide, please. And this is just an idea too. You might have wondered in the past, like, what millipedes, what do they do? What do they help? Well, one thing that they help is glowworms. The glowworms eat them. Next slide, please. They also help break down everything, but that's not in this talk. Diurnal non-flashing fireflies. Okay, they're just like the flashing fireflies, but they're actually around during the day. And instead of the flashing to communicate, they're using pheromones. And so you can see on that picture at the bottom that it's dark. They don't have a lantern. Next slide, please. Okay. And now we get to the flashing, the life cycle of both of these. And the life cycle graphic that I showed before, that had the three different types I was talking about. But here's a little picture of the eggs when they're glowing. And during the day, they're not really that remarkable. There's a couple different species and what they might look like as larvae and as pupa. And they're at the top for the adults. We have the dark firefly and a flashing firefly. And one thing that's really interesting about these guys is that you'll see that in the egg stage and the adult stage, they're not living very long. And the majority of the time in the adult stage, and of course in the egg stage, they're not eating. In the larva, in the pupa stage, they're not eating either. But as a larva, they're going to live for 1 to 2 years in that upper level of this layer of the soil with lots of leaf matter. And they're surviving on next slide. I think that's the next one that shows it. Yep. Okay. Snails and slugs. And it's kind of interesting. Like they might look really innocent, but they're really tough predators. They will bite that poor little snail and emit a venom that dissolves the snail. And basically, what it ends up is that it becomes a smoothie, a snail smoothie, and that is how they survive for 1 to 2 years. So that layer of leaf matter that we all say, like, don't mow too much, don't rake up your leaves. It's really important to maintain that moisture and to maintain those other invertebrates that are living in the soil. Next slide, please. And nocturnal.
So now I'm going to take over and talk about some of our nocturnal or flashing fireflies. So one quick question just for everyone to think about. What is a firefly and what's a lightning bug? So I'll give you just a second to figure out which one is which on the screen. And hopefully you have an answer. The answer is both of the images are both fireflies and lightning bugs. It's just a regional terminology. So typically, lightning bugs are that term is used within the southeastern United States. Firefly is used mostly everywhere else. But some sad news on the term lightning bug, it's dying out a little bit since most biologists and other people printing media use firefly, so that's mainly what people are growing up with now. Something to think about as well is how many firefly species are there in Georgia? So, as a quick reminder, fireflies are a beetle in the family Lampyridae, and globally there's 3,500 species of them and 179 species in the US that have been documented. So, think about how many species there are in Georgia, and you might be wrong. There's 43 species. So, uh, this image shows a couple different species that we have within the state. Uh, there's 7 different genera of fireflies in Georgia, and this image just shows image on the right. I mean, on the left shows a couple of those genera. So you have Photorus, which is one of them, Pyromactera, Photinus, and Lucidota. So these different fireflies generally, you can kind of see on the right image, have different flash colors associated with the different genera. So Phocis, which has the blue ghost in it, tends to have a bluish flash. Pyractomina has an orange flash. Photorus has a generally yellow flash, but that's not always a hard set rule. And then something else to think about is as we age, our eyes see the colors of the flashes less accurately. So I've run into this issue before myself where gone into a survey and disagreed with the color of a flash just because as we age, our eyes see it, the flash is more washed out and white versus what the colors truly are, just kind of like how we lose our hearing range a little bit as we age. The next thing to think about too is fireflies are really dependent on temperature for their development. So Anna referred to them taking 1 to 2 years to grow and develop in the soil or leaf litter layer. And I'll just break this down a little bit. So you can kind of see within the southern US, our peak season is May to June. And then as you get further north, that season's kind of pushed back a little bit just because there's less warmth uh, a little bit later in the season. And then these fireflies are dependent on something that we call growing degree days. So just kind of broken down any day, any number below 1000 is generally referred to as spring, 1000 to 1800 early summer, and then 1800 through 3000 summer to autumn. It's kind of complicated to calculate the growing degree days, but typically you're taking any day since March 1st, uh, looking at the low and the high for that day, subtracting it from 50, and then you just add that to a counter. So fireflies are really dependent on these growing degree days, and I have a couple examples below in the bottom left. So within, for example, Georgia and even somewhere further north, the blue ghost, which is that first species listed, it has two peaks within their display season. So in the southeast, they'll emerge warmer, but typically in that range, and then later as well in that range. And it's kind of the same for the other species where they'll emerge in that growing degree day. And the final thing to note is within the West and the rest of the continental US, there are fireflies. There's just not as many since fireflies are tied to very mesic or wet habitat. So don't look at the map and say, oh, I've been to Utah and I've seen a firefly there before. There are just less of them. And I'll send this to Anna.
Okay. So previously I mentioned the chemical reaction in fireflies, and it's actually not just that chemical reaction that provides that can distinguish that is a distinguishing feature between different firefly species. So within the firefly lantern, of course, there's different sizes of lanterns because they're different sizes of fireflies, but there's also different amounts of transparent and translucent exoskeleton that will be on that abdomen of the firefly surrounding the lantern. And within the lantern, at the spot that's at the tip of the firefly abdomen, there's also there's the light cells, and there are also reflector cells. So that lantern that looks really kind of simple if you look at a firefly actually has just a tremendous amount going on inside it. Next slide, please. All right, so there's the lantern, and there's also a lot of different, there's 43 species in Georgia and 179 Ahmad mentioned in the US, and maybe 2,000 plus worldwide. And all of these species, they're very distinct. So how can you tell the difference? They all look very similar in the hand, but those lanterns also have transparent and translucent and opaque areas on them that create a little bit of a design. If you're a firefly of the same species, you might see it and be like, wow, that's really obviously one of my cousins. But for us, of course, we can't see the difference. They're so tiny. There's also a lot of other differences between these fireflies that can show the species distinctions. Some of those, so we have the morphology of the lantern, the size of the firefly. They also fly different heights. Different species fly different heights. You see them maybe in the treetops or down close to the ground. How fast the fireflies fly, how fast do they fly is another feature. How fast do they flash? What is the pattern of their flashing? And as you can see in the picture, that has something to do with the flight. So what patterns do they make when they fly, and when do they light up when they're making those patterns? The color of the light, which Ahmad is going to talk about more, and also when are we going to see those fireflies? Are they an early springtime firefly, or are they a late summer firefly? Those are just some of the distinctions between them. Next slide, please.
So, talking about Flash, we have some Flash pattern terminology that we use to help ID or get accurate IDs for species. So we have the flash period. So from when one set of flashes start to another set of flashes, the flash interval, so that's the time in between individual flashes, and then the flash duration. So the flash duration can be very short for something, for example, like the single snappy sync, where it's just flash, 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 and it's just a consistent flash train versus a long flash train for something like the blue ghost firefly, where they just start flashing and they leave their lantern on. Another thing, I mentioned this earlier regarding their colors that they're using to flash. Typically for species that have orange flash or orange or yellow, those are more so species that are flashing right at dusk. And then you can get greens and greens and blue color flashes, and those are typically nighttime flashing species. So thing to think about with that is that light affects different fireflies differently. So, for example, those dust flashing species are a little bit less affected by light pollution. But if you have a light on your property or somewhere else, those later species, they won't want to flash or won't communicate or find each other just because they're used to having more darkness before they'll flash or signal to each other.
So what are these? Why are they making the flashes? Well, we all hear about communication and reproduction, and they definitely need to be able to see each other for that, as Ahmad said. Other reasons are distress. They will signal if they're distressed, or predation and trickery. Next slide, please. So some of you have heard about the femme fatale fireflies, and this is a really bizarre type of behavior. Most fireflies as adults will not feed. They're only going to be flashing and flying for about 2 to 3 weeks, but some of them will, and they're feeding to gain more of the flashing and actually they have a toxin too, to try to deter predators. So they're feeding also to get that. And where are they getting it from? Other fireflies. So this is the general story for that. The ones that are eating are the Photorus genus of fireflies, and it is the Photorus females that are doing the eating. Photorus is a major genera, and that's in Georgia. We have the majority of our fireflies are either in the genus Photorus or the genus Photinus. So the Photorus are larger in general, and what happens is a female Photorus will see some a Photinus flashing, and she'll know, hey, there's a Photinus flashing. I'm going to try to reel him in. So she'll sit on a leaf, because the females generally sit on leaves and they're lower down and they flash differently than the males flash. So she'll be there, she'll sit, she'll start flashing as if she were a female of a Photinus species, and she will draw him in. And then that photo on the right is showing that she'll catch him and eat him. The Photorus are way larger than the Photinus in general. So it's a deadly combination. Next slide, please.
So I'll talk about some quick species accounts for somewhat or rare and common species in the Georgia Piedmont, but you can find some of these a little bit throughout the state as well. The first one is Photinus pyralis. So one is commonly called the common eastern firefly or the Big Dipper firefly. It's very cosmopolitan. So you probably have seen this one in your backyard. It comes out right at dusk, so you might have seen this one or captured it or put it in jars as a kid. So the type of activity it has is just called vespertine, where it's just active at dusk, between dusk and night. And then it has that J pattern where it's typically flashing between waist and ankle height, and it'll do a dip and a ascend, and they'll just keep doing that until they stop displaying for the night. And the next one is Photoris frontalis. So this one is called the Snappy Single Sync. It's one of our synchronous firefly, and something to note is it is different than the firefly species that's in the Great Smoky Mountains. So this one is locally common within the Georgia Piedmont, very cosmopolitan as well, so very widespread. This one's a nocturnal night species. And then you can kind of see from that image below, it flashes in a line and it'll just move, flash, and keep flashing. So they start out asynchronously or not flashing at the same time, but as they congregate, they'll all sync up or flash all at the same time and do that for the entire night until they end their display. I'm going to show you guys a quick video. So if it's very dim, so you might want to turn down your lights very quickly, and I'm going to put it on right now, and you can see them displaying in it. You can see the flashes are all just very synchronously, very much at the same time. And they'll just keep doing that for the entire duration of their display. Okay. And then I'll
Okay,
send it over to Anna.
thank you. So one thing we want to tell you all about is the Firefly Atlas. And this is an atlas that is national, and it's run by the Xerces Society, which is a conservation organization for invertebrates. Um, you can use the QR code on the left to get to the atlas, or you can find it by Googling on the website. Next slide, please. And it is a community science effort. The more data they get, the more understanding we'll have of those species that are out and around, so that we can work towards trying to conserve them and trying to conserve them. We need to know what's there in order to help them. So it's not that hard to get involved. There's some training that is online. The people that are part of the Firefly Atlas that run it are really amazing. They give you a lot of feedback about your sightings. And the equipment that you would start with are, because fireflies are generally in wetter areas, you might want to have boots. You will need to catch them, so it can be a lot of fun. You become 7 again. But you will release them. It's a non-lethal study. You catch them in insect nets and put them in a bag or petri dishes or little vials, and you'll photograph them. And you would upload those pictures with data, and they provide the data sheets to the website. One thing you'd want to have is, like turtles, fireflies are sensitive to the wavelength of light. So red flashlights are the best. And also you can just put some sort of clear red plastic material over your flashlight as well. You don't need to buy a special flashlight. And we highly recommend Lynn Faust's book, Fireflies, Glowworms, and Lightning Bugs. It was actually published by Georgia Press, and it is an absolutely amazing book. And one thing about it is she's funny. it's not a regular scientific uh, guidebook. I think those are great, but if you actually read some of the things she's saying, she's got a sense of humor in the writing. Next slide, please. So here are some of the data sheets, and that's actually Reagan on the left. She's one of the people that work with us at DNR, and she's wearing a red light in order to look at the fireflies. And the data sheets are for flashing fireflies, diurnal fireflies, and glowworms also. And they can be really, there's some detail in them. You'd probably want to acquaint yourself with the data sheets before going out in the dark. They're going to ask things like temperature, location, and then details such as the flight pattern that we kind of mentioned, how high they are above the ground, what type of light, the speed, what time of day, and information such as that. Next slide, please. And there's training, lots of training online. And here is, so then it's also really easy to upload your data. Here's one of the locations that we uploaded from one of our surveys. So photos that you'll take are generally just of the fireflies. That is a firefly, that's a photo that I thought was really nice and I uploaded it, but most of them are just of the firefly. And photos like that, there's a lot of ways that you can learn how to take nighttime photos. And actually some of the newer models of cell phones are good for taking them. But yeah, it's a whole other thing to experience. So there's a picture too. The size of the firefly is important to photograph. And Richard Joyce, who is one of the coordinators of the Atlas, once you put your data in, he'll send you back comments like, thanks for your description. This was really great. Or maybe ask you some questions. Next slide, please.
So next thing to kind of note with the Firefly Atlas, they have several focal areas, and you can see that the Georgia Piedmont and North Georgia are in that focal area. So these are some of the places where they really want data from. Not to say that they don't want data from other locations. And then they have about 13 species, 13 focal species where they are extremely concerned about collecting data, with the Loopy 5 Firefly being one of them, pictured on the left. There's also within Georgia two species that are considered endangered, the Loopy 5 Firefly, and I'll talk more about that in a second, and then the pointy-lobed Firefly. So the Loopy 5 Firefly gets its name from a loop it does. It typically does a series of 4 to 7 flashes, usually about 3 or 4 pulses, 2 or 3 longer flashes, and then the scientific name is Photurus foresti. It's an uncommon firefly species that's associated with beaver pond wetlands or herbaceous wetlands, which a lot of people don't really want beavers around due to the flooding that they can cause. And then they are typically flashing about 45 minutes after sunset, then can go for up to about 2 hours or so. And then they have that very distinct loop pattern that you can see, which is where they get their name from. The Loopy 5 was described relatively recently. So first described in South Carolina, and you can see some of the survey efforts that have been going on for it. But interestingly enough, most of the detections for that species have actually been in Georgia, specifically around Athens, Georgia, and that area. We're trying to gain and gather more data as our program expands and grows to see what exactly their distribution is and where exactly they're occurring to see their rarity and species status. And then we partner with a ton of different people. So, for example, our state parks and other people. So Watson Mill Bridge State Park, we did a survey with them earlier this year, and State Botanical Garden, we did a survey where they restored a beaver pond wetland within the last couple of years, and we were able to find loopy fives there, as well as some YouTubers. So that's them in that bottom image, and you can see Anna and I. And this slide is just very much just eye candy for everyone, but all of us just surveying in the mud, having fun. So you can see the red lights that are pretty essential for us to see in the dark, so we disrupt so we're the least disruptive for the fireflies. You see our rubber boots since we are in those kind of like wetland or mesic areas, and then Lynn Faust is pictured on the right, talking to Alan Grubb, one of the landowners we worked with in the past. So there's a ton of different habitats for a ton of different species, but something as we've been kind of harping about is that they're associated with wet or mesic sites to some extent. So you can have them within freshwater ponds, herbaceous wetlands, grasslands, or even woodlands. But all of these sites have something where there's some sort of wet or mesic component there where maybe the leaf litter or the soil's holding that moisture for them just because their larva stage and their host prey items are reliant on that moisture. Currently, right now, Georgia DNR, we aren't doing any active habitat restoration or maintenance for any of these species. We're currently in the step where we're forming checklists and trying to figure out the distributions for a lot of our species so that we can see what exactly Georgia has. And then we'll start taking more appropriate conservation efforts once we have a good understanding of Georgia's firefly species. So identifying fireflies can be easy, but it can also be extremely hard, and Anna can tell you about this too. But there's several things we're relying on when we're IDing species. So flash patterns. So some species can be ID'd just by looking at their flash patterns. Those for Taurus foresti, which is that loopy five, a very distinct flash pattern. Photinus pyralis, you can ID that one with just a photo typically. And then there's some like Photinus acuminatus, so that's a pointy-lobed firefly, and that one you can look at it, you can see its flash, but you won't have an accurate ID unless you dissect it to look at its genitalia since it's very unique compared to other species. So one other thing to note in with their flash patterns, especially, they're very heat or temperature dependent. So there's a ton of different flashes out there and a ton of species that do single pulses or double pulses or just long flash trains. And one way that we're able to determine what species is what is what temperature it is, since it's kind of like a symphony where the temperature determines how fast they'll flash. So we get this question all the time. I've heard it 1,000 times, and Anna has too. Where are all the fireflies? So just put at the top a headline that I've seen recently. I feel like this year, especially, a lot of people have been hit with the news that we might be the last generation to enjoy fireflies, since there's been a decline in them. Just looking at facts and figures. So the IUCN did an assessment of firefly species within the US and Canada. About 16% of them are threatened with extinction in some way. So that means within the near future, so that they would go extinct. And then about one-third of them are least concerned or not threatened. So that means we're not worried about extinction in the future for those species. And then about 50% of them are data deficient. So that means we're unsure about their conservation status. There's just not data out there just because there's not a lot of people doing work with fireflies. But we're thinking, just talking with the Firefly Atlas, that that 50% will more than likely reflect the 50% that we know their conservation status right now. So then that would just bump it up to 1/3 of fireflies species being threatened with extinction, and then the other 2/3 being either least concerned or near threatened. A lot of these threats are things like light pollution. So 79% of species are threatened with light pollution in some way or wastewater runoff, and that's due to a couple of different factors. And then you have smaller threats, so herbicides and pesticides, soil erosion, and different things. Planting for fireflies, it's a very tricky but easy situation. They don't have host plants as we refer to, but they are very reliant on very specific habitat types. So planting native plants especially is very much needed for them. Most of the places Anna and I have seen uh, very biodiverse firefly locations have been very well intact ecosystems. So just making sure that you're planting native plants, making sure it's dark, making sure you're keeping them free from pesticides, having that herbaceous layer, maybe some shade or moisture retention in some way, and making sure you're not disturbing the soil or leaf litter layer by trampling or raking your leaves, since those eggs and larvae are in that layer. Another thing to think about is pesticide use. A lot of people spray their lawns for mosquitoes, and then those pesticides or insecticides also kill beetles, which fireflies are a type of beetle. And if they're not impacted directly by them, more than likely they might eat one of their prey items. So a worm, a slug, a snail that has been sprayed, or eaten something that's been sprayed, ingest that, and then the firefly will eat that prey item and take up that pesticides and can be can be essentially die because of that. So you just want to make sure you're not spraying for mosquitoes and taking caution to dump out water if you're worried about mosquitoes standing water on your property or other things. And then that insecticide can also run off into uh, adjacent waterways. And since these larvae for the fireflies are in that, they can be in water as well sometimes, or that soil layer, they'll also just take it up that way as well.
And light pollution, as the graph that Ahmad showed, when we're considering the threats, you could say that 70% of what is affecting some of these populations is light. So it was interesting. I spoke with my father earlier today about when he grew up in Brooklyn, New York. He was up at the top of his apartment building when he was younger with his father, and they look through a telescope up and be able to see the planets. It was a really good telescope. But the fact that he was able to see all of that when he was in New York, in Brooklyn, New York, is pretty amazing. But then again, he was a little boy in like the 1940s. And so here's a graphic showing um, satellite imagery. When you look from, let's say, the 1950s to today, just it's actually in some ways amazing if the fireflies rely on darkness to communicate, that they're actually even communicating at all. We have just an enormous amount of light pollution. Next slide, please. Oh, and I should have mentioned that organization, Dark Sky, and there's the Google link there. They are an organization that would be really great to check out. They explain what the individual or community can do to try to help promote darkness. And also, there is no chapter in Georgia, Ahmad pointed out to me. So if anybody is interested, it would be a great thing for people to work together on. Alan, artificial light at night. There's four main types of light pollution that's talked about when it comes to fireflies. There's the glare. There's also sky glow. Light trespass is kind of on a more individual, smaller scale, and overlighting. And in the cases of something like overlights, those could be road lights, those could be park lights, and recommendations are to lower the lumens or to have more directed light. Light trespass is an important thing to consider. And actually, next slide, I'll mention those a little more. After this slide, I'll mention them more. Here you can see some of the degrees that the levels of light pollution. So on the left, let's say the excellent dark, people might actually be able to see the Milky Way outside. That might be in a place like perhaps Arizona, some of the areas of Arizona that are trying to maintain darkness. All the way on the left is probably more of an area like Atlanta. And there's lots of different degrees in between. Next slide, please. So how does this impact them, the different amounts of light? Well, they get confused. They might think it's a different time of day. They might not be able to find each other. They might mistake each other. As a firefly, I might mistake one firefly for somebody who might be in the same species, not be able to breed. Sometimes they just stress out and don't want to have any, they don't signal to each other. So there's a lot of different ways that artificial light can impact fireflies. Things that can be done are to try to use different kinds of shades on light to direct light. If you want security, to try to put out motion detector lights versus lights that will shine all night long. You can try to reduce the lumens that you might have and control where your light goes. And also, the different colors of light is important. They say yellow, red, and red LED lights are preferred. And the best is if you can find something that's more amber, which is like a yellow orange mix, and that will put you in the right wavelength for the least disruptive. Although we might use those colored lights, there is really no way in any of the lighting that we try to use to completely eliminate the risk it causes to fireflies. So darkness is the best. And even in our surveys, we try to keep our red lights off as much as we can and then put them on only when needed. Next slide, please. However, there are communities getting together, and this is Flagstaff, Arizona, is where I was thinking of. I'm excited to see that there is some legislation going on in different areas where and guidance as well, which helps. It's always better to have guidance than to not have any at all, of course. So if communities can get together and try to encourage certain types of lighting and explain to people what they need, that's really great. One thing too is I know that there's a lot of lighting concerns with turtles, with sea turtles. When we were doing surveys at Jekyll Island, the street lights and everything people carried were red. And that was exciting to see. Of course, when I was with my group of people, I was like, oh, wow, everybody's so concerned about the fireflies. And then people had to remind me, oh, yeah, it could be for other creatures too. Next slide, please. So a little bit about what DNR itself is doing. So of course, individuals and communities are going to be the ones that really can make a difference. Our section of DNR does not regulate, so we can't enforce anything that we think would be good to help with conservation. We can only suggest. But with our suggestions, we do have some that we just completed a state wildlife action plan that has not yet gone through all the processes. So we don't entirely know if everything in it will pass. But in terms of species, we do have 2 rare fireflies on our state wildlife action plan list, the ones that Ahmad mentioned, the loopy 5 and the pointy lobed. And then we have some species that we consider to be sort of indicators of nocturnal health of an area. And what we'd like to do is be able to have some surveys, because there really aren't a lot of surveys out there that say, yes, fireflies were here. No, they're not here. We might see that certain species are in decline, but we don't necessarily see if they're in certain populations of species are in decline. We don't have numbers for that. And also, fireflies are insects and a lot of other species. So we put them into our SWAP to try to come to start some surveys for that type of thing. We also were trying to communicate the conservation needs. We're doing firefly surveys, like working with partners on the atlas. And we're trying to do research out there. It's not just us, though. Of course, we're everywhere we're going, we're asking people to help us because there aren't a whole lot we don't have a very big group. So we've been sending around all season invitations to people that we know are interested. And if anybody on this call has been helping us, thanks a lot. It's really been great. We also, the state parks, particularly Phil DeLestris, he's a resource manager for half of the state parks. He's been working closely with the Xerces Society to try to have management plans that will reflect the firefly species that are there and to help them. And the wildlife management areas, there's work being done too to try to reduce mowing, and that helps the fireflies, to try to encourage native species. So that's just some of what DNR has been doing. Next slide, please. And we come to the conclusion. We really want to do a big shout out for everybody that has been helping us for the last few years. We mentioned Lynn Faust's book. It's excellent. And she's been a great person to work with and give us advice. Richard Joyce from the Xerces Society. He is one of the Atlas coordinators, and he was instrumental in the SWAP and our surveys. He's really awesome, really just a text away when we have big questions. Alan Grubbs is, he was a volunteer that lived locally until recently, and he actually put the loopy 5s on the map for Georgia. He called different firefly experts when he thought he saw them, and as a result, he got us interested, and now we're completely hooked at DNR. We have a small invertebrate team, terrestrial invertebrates, me, Ahmad, Reagan, and Alexanne. But we've also had lots of people in the wildlife conservation section help us, as well as parks. And those are some of our survey locations. And in every place, we've had awesome people within those areas and outside of those areas that have helped us a lot. Next slide. And I also want to mention that every time you all purchase a license plate, just a hook, you're helping with our efforts.
All right, thank you so much. That was very informative, and we do have several questions. I want to get to those, but it strikes me as just in summary, if you think about why we don't see as many fireflies, it's habitat loss, pesticide usage, and light pollution. Those are the same things that threaten all the other insects, especially the moths and the butterflies that we hear so much about. So all that we do, and I know all that you do as members of GMPS, to foster those native plants and the other little insects that they foster, it will do the same thing to help fireflies. So what you're already doing for the other insects that you hear probably more about with the host plants, when you do that, it'll also help native plants. But one of the things I do want to point out when you think about habitat loss, it's not just a parking lot. It's also lawn, because lawn does nothing to support fireflies. So I wanted to ask you, before we ask the other questions, why does lawn not help fireflies?
Well, so there's many different reasons. A lot of the times the lawns they're not native grasses, so they're not growing in the soil as what has traditionally been grown in Georgia, helping a lot of the native species are reaching deeper into the soil, providing more oxygen and maintaining that moisture. So that is all a big help for um, the fireflies, native versus non-native grasses. Also, the length of the lawn. If the shorter the lawn, the more dry it is. So they won't survive with that. Leaf litter is very important. It's much better to have an area that does not have grasses at all and has the leaf litter for fireflies to survive those 1 to 2 years as larvae. Those are some of them. Ahmad, what else would you say?
I think that covers most of the reasons. So just kind of reiterating reiterating some of the points, just making sure you have some leaf litter so that the larva and eggs they don't get dried out. And you have some native plants and native plants in general so that those slugs and worms and soft body invertebrates are there so that the fireflies can eat them.
Want to throw
Right.
one other thing too out that a lot of the non-native grasses probably may rely on some of the chemical to try to maintain their green, pretty growth. So those chemicals are probably going to be they're going to be bad for the fireflies,
Yep.
the larvae.
So Ahmad, we had a question about the GDD numbers. What does the actual number, if you see it, stand for?
So growing degree days, but the M just stands for modified growing degree days, and then I can just go into that calculations really quick. So expanding a little bit more, and I think I said this earlier, you start, depending on where you're at in the country, it can start a little bit sooner or later, but typically for most of the US, you're going to do the first date since March 1st. Look at the high and low for that day, subtract 50, and then let's just say, for example, you get 8 degrees of differences or whatnot. You add that to a counter, and then you just keep doing that. And then once you get up to 1000, for example, now you're in early summer, and that's how you calculate those numbers.
All right, we had an interesting question. Do firefly eggs glow?
They
Yes.
do.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't mind me adding something else, so some people, or something interesting to think about is what evolved first, the flashes in the larva or the adults. And we've seen amber that have had fireflies trapped in them and the larva, etc. So we know that the flashes evolved first in a larva, as kind of a defense mechanism. So let's just say, for example, you're flashing at the larva, a frog eats you, and then the frog recognizes that the next time it eats something that's glowing, it's going to get a nasty mouthful of bug. And then that just kind of generally carried over into most adults for fireflies.
Cool. So is pine straw as effective as leaf litter for supporting fireflies?
Pine litter is leaf litter. So as long as it's holding in that moisture, and I'll let Anna add any additional information.
I think that's probably, I haven't heard that there's a problem, but I guess you might want to consider what might like what you might want to consider it a little bit, just because if you're in an area maybe that wouldn't have had certain species, like the majority loblolly, maybe it wouldn't be quite as good, but I don't know. Yeah, forget it. I think Ahmad's answer is better. Pine litter's leaf litter. Go with
And
that.
I'll just add one additional thing with that is that pines typically have burned, or they're associated with ecosystems that do have some sort of frequent fire to some extent. So that's just, of course, you're probably not going to be burning right around your house, but in nature, you might have less fireflies if there's burning. So maybe depending on where you're at, hardwood leaf litter might be better.
So Christy asked a question about where or what determines where they fly. So whether it's in the canopy or near the ground or in a lower level.
So some of the species distinction, some species will only flash in the treetops and some will flash lower down. There is a little bit of a difference, but with those big extremes, you're generally going to have different species. You will see flashes though. Let's say you're about head height versus lower down. There's going to be some of the same firefly species flying there, and the females a lot of times will tend to be lower, and they're going to stay on some of the lower vegetation. So when it's a really big extreme, it might be species, but within the species, you might see a little difference between the sexes in terms of flash height.
Good. And so just again, what is the lifespan of a firefly or an average firefly?
So, on average, as a larva, they're about 1 to 2 years, and as an adult, they only have a few weeks, and younger than the larva too. It's really just a few weeks. So I'd say about 1 to 2 years with some additional weeks.
Okay. And so are there other types of beetles that are bioluminescent in Georgia?
Some of the additional there's click beetles, and that's not all click beetles, but some click beetles do have light. There's so there were the Fangatidae that I had mentioned. Those are also, believe they're also Coleoptera. Although they don't necessarily look like one as a female. And those are the only ones I know of.
Good. So somebody just asked a question that's interesting. So if my neighbors have bright lights around their house, how far away, if I'm going to build leaf litter piles, should I do it?
I wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to guess. I don't know,
Yeah.
Ahmad. What do you think?
But there's just a couple different things to consider, like how far away exactly is the light and how bright it is, and without knowing that exact situation, we can't exactly give you a good response. And then one additional thing to maybe think about too is how big you're making the piles, since you don't want to just do a giant pile of leaves, more so recreate what's going on in nature where there's that layer, even spread of leaf litter. And that's all I'll add to it.
I'd also
Okay.
like to mention that if you could put some sort of a tree border between your house and your neighbor's house, you might be able to get a little bit of that as a barrier to make your area a little darker.
Good. And so Miranda had asked about, is there any like local, has anybody had any success in getting their local jurisdiction or municipality to change the color of this, like street lights? I'm not aware of any in Georgia, but
Not in Georgia.
all of
That
you can bring that
actually,
up to your local city council or local county commissioners. Those are who impact that. So if they know people are concerned with it, because that the bright light pointing up or down, all that affects wildlife. So if they know people are caring about it, that's when they start to make a difference.
and I think too, the fact that like so many people are talking about fireflies now, it might be that now's the time to really start saying things.
And then I'll just add on one additional thing as well. Light pollution is not just a firefly issue, it affects a broad spectrum of wildlife. So things from bats to migratory birds, sea turtles, as we alluded to, and then even a human health issue since our bodies are reliant on that day-night cycle. And even just, this is me harping very quickly, LED lights with cars. So very painful for us, very painful for fireflies.
So do yellow lights affect fireflies the same as they do as white lights? You mentioned red lights. Are yellow lights bad for fireflies? Because we hear they're good for moths.
Yellow lights are preferred over the colder colors. Ideally, a mixture of yellow and orange. And there's actually a range of the nanometers, 600 to 700. The wavelength is best, and that's the amber lights. But yellow and red are, I guess, second best, you could say.
Yeah, so somebody had asked about, are there alternatives to getting rid of mosquitoes that don't affect fireflies? And so I can just answer this. If you go to Homegrown National Park, whose mascot is a firefly, they have a very good description of how to do a mosquito dunk bucket. And that is what will control it much better. So everybody's job here should be to put Mosquito Joe on the unemployment line. Not only for what they do with fireflies, but for everything. But those mosquito dunks actually do help control the mosquito population. The fogging does not. So last question, somebody had asked, so it's kind of a fun one, and then we'll wrap up. What is your favorite species of firefly? Ask both of you.
I now am stuck on a couple. I would say the common one, the that we grew up with, the common firefly, and the pyralis. And then there's also, I would say, the loopy 5 now, because it really got me hooked into this. So
And then
very
for
common.
me,
Sorry.
I think my favorite would be, I'm also with Anna, is very tricky because all of them are just super unique in different ways and a ton of different flash patterns. But I always get excited whenever I see the single snappy sync firefly. So I'm like, that's us, we got it here. And then just to I've seen them before where there's just so many of them, they're lighting up the entire woods and you can see into the woods, and it's just pretty cool.
It is
Great.
really cool.
Yep. Well, thanks again, Anna and Ahmad. This was very informative, and thank all of you for joining.